It all begins on a devastated battlefield, where war has left a trail of pure destruction. Archimonde coughs up an absurd amount of blood after receiving a fatal wound to his chest. Leaning on his own weapon, he can barely stay upright, breathing with great difficulty. The holy sword of the Order has pierced his heart, and the knights celebrate that they finally took down their target. The surrounding soldiers shout that he is the devil of the continent. The famous necromancer Archimonde is riddled with arrows and knows his end is near. With no way out, he accepts that he will die right there in the snow. This was the great 10-year Continental War, where an elite squad managed to infiltrate his lines. The necromancer had foreseen this and set up a defensive line, but he ended up failing miserably. With that, he admits total defeat in this historic battle. All of this happened because of a single knight, the leader of the northern troops, Berkul Rhineland. Walking up to him, Berkul mentions that he didn't achieve this victory through his own power alone. For him to get there, many people shed blood and heroically held the front line. Therefore, he tells the enemy to surrender at once to ensure the long-awaited peace of the continent. At that, Archimonde grows furious and tells the knight to shut his mouth. Irritated, he asks where they all were when people were dying from the plague, accusing the Order of being worse than beasts for asking for peace now. To him, all the knights are nothing but a bunch of disgusting hypocrites. Having no patience for speeches, the villain glares at the enemy leader with hatred in his eyes. Emanating a sinister green aura, he swears he will finish off every single human with his own hands. The soldiers are shocked to see such an absurd demonstration of magic. They are terrified to realize the necromancer can still summon power in that critical state. Quickly, Berkul raises his shield, warning that the situation has become dangerous and telling him to stop. The spark of this entire war was the plague that took 20 million people, who were then turned into a dark army. Spitting blood, Archimonde mocks the moral lesson and asks if they think he's stupid. Among the dead victims were many acquaintances of the knights, proving the attack is just a personal vendetta. Staring at the northern leader, he asks directly if he's wrong about that petty motivation. Holding his sword firmly, the hero states he came there for only one single reason. All of Berkul's fighting serves exclusively to guarantee the future of the children. For the first time, the necromancer is completely confused by that pure response. The knight explains that he needs to leave his choices, convictions, and hopes to the next generation. Looking at the hero, Archimonde sees only a corrupted version of himself in the blade. However, the reflection in his opponent's eyes shows the imposing stature of a truly righteous knight. A radiant light descends from the dark skies and illuminates the entire battlefield. Wrapped in this divine energy, Berkul reinforces that he does this for the sake of his descendants. With no physical strength left to fight, the necromancer finally falls to his knees on the ground. Accepting his tragic fate, he simply tells the hero to deliver the final blow. The other soldiers panic and beg their leader not to discard the holy sword at that moment. Ignoring the warnings, the knight draws a dark sword full of runes to finish the heavy job. Pointing the new weapon at the enemy's neck, he asks if he has any last words. Bleeding heavily, Archimonde gives a smile, warning that necromancers don't die so easily. He promises that he will return someday, but he is interrupted by the swing of the enemy's sword. With a swift and brutal movement, Berkul decapitates the target without a second thought. Dark blood splashes far from the force of the blow dealt by the hero. The soldiers raise their weapons and cheer in unison at the definitive death of the great villain. Lying on the ground, Archimonde's severed head can still hear the army's victory cries as his consciousness fades. The crowd continues to celebrate, relieved at the end of that dark nightmare. This was the final milestone of the Great 10-Year War against the worst threat that ever existed, and so occurred the official fall of the feared necromancer, marking a new era. Somewhere far away, heavy rain falls incessantly from the night sky. A bolt of lightning rips through the darkness, revealing the massive mansion of a noble family during the storm. In the well-lit room, two maids are startled to see the newborn baby's lips moving. One of them slowly approaches to get a better look and lets out an exclamation of surprise. Archimonde's soul awakens in that fragile little body and tries to figure out where he is. Excitedly, the servant picks up a mirror, revealing the Duchess and informing him that she is his mother. Young Master Klein feels his own muscles are heavy while the woman smiles, asking him to call out to her. The baby babbles with great effort, trying to release the first syllables that come to his throat. The maids press their hands together, impressed by the baby's genius in trying to speak so early. Suddenly, the boy's eyes widen, and he screams, summoning his dark guardians, claiming to be Archimonde. With an absurd voice of command, he demands immediate obedience, making the servants drop their things in a panic. A blue lightning bolt cuts through the skies over the estate, accompanying the furious awakening of the little reincarnated villain. A furious storm with intense lightning covers the main area of the huge plaza fountain. 15 years pass quickly since that bizarre day of the noble heir's birth. Walking through the sunny city, some girls sigh in enchantment at the presence of someone special. They are completely mesmerized by his handsome face and flawless silver hair. Young Master Klein grew up very well and is now considered a true divine masterpiece. Despite all the praise around him, he maintains a serious expression of total boredom with the situation. The maids continue whispering nonsense about how wonderful and stylish he is in his daily life. Suddenly, the boy turns his head, noticing some very suspicious movement approaching. Without any warning, a bucket full of water is thrown at Klein's head by someone celebrating having found him. The one responsible for the attack is Garrison Bierkman, a priest who commands the evil spirit to vanish. Frustrated, the old man finds the reaction strange, as he swears he saw the exact same expression as the Dark Lord on the boy. The maids flee in fear down the hallway while the priest celebrates that the purification happened just in time. With the basin stuck on his head, Klein shakes off the water, asking if the old man ever gets tired of that useless ritual. Garrison pushes back firmly, stating that the necromancer's evil soul still lies dormant within the young master. While splashing more holy water on Klein's irritated face, the priest insists loudly that he just made the villain face. Staring at the priest in disbelief, Klein asks if the old man has gone completely out of his mind. Without wasting time, the boy runs away as fast as possible while cursing the priest repeatedly. Immediately, Garrison points his finger and orders the guards to capture the runaway without hesitation. The fanatic warns that the crime of disrespect will result in a naked holy bath, while the young master screams his own name in protest. Submerged in this bizarre memory, the protagonist reflects that he really didn't foresee things taking this turn. He had his head cut off and woke up in the body of a baby, but reciting dark spells too early got him locked in a monastery. Huddled in the dark, the young boy went through moments of pure trauma and isolation in that enclosed place. The imposing figure of the priest became his greatest and most constant nightmare during his confinement. Holding a book, Garrison used to coldly question whether he was dealing with the necromancer or the noble child. The punishment involved listening to the priest's prayer chants for 24 uninterrupted hours. Additionally, he was also forced to take freezing baths with garlic floating in the holy water. To make matters worse, he still had to endure absurd rituals, being tied to a cross surrounded by purifying flames. The poor boy's cries for help echoed through the monastery chapel with no one coming to help him. 5 years after all that suffering, Klein appears lying on his bedroom floor wearing a party hat. With her hands together, his personal maid Arin prays that he grows up as a healthy descendant of heroes. Hearing all that exaggerated prayer, the protagonist wears an expression of pure mental exhaustion. Unable to take it anymore, he rips the hat off his head and throws it on the floor with great force, startling the servant. Arin begins to whimper softly, revealing that she had made that accessory with her own hands. Realizing his mistake, Klein bends down to pick up the item and apologizes for acting so rudely. Then, the maid completes her sentence, mentioning that the piece was sewn by Priest Garrison. Instantly, the boy freezes with the crumpled hat in his hands and a look of deep disgust. Right at that moment, the priest himself appears in the doorway calling for the young master. Wiping away a tear, the old man gets emotional, thinking the boy kept the gift he spent a week knitting. Trembling with rage, Klein crushes the fabric completely and announces he won't wear that under any circumstances. Faced with the refusal, Garrison screams that the evil soul has awakened, while the youth screams back, demanding his peace. At that, the Knight Commander Dunkel bows slightly and asks if the ritual has finished yet. With a nervous smile, the man comments that the rumors about the possession have lasted for over 10 years. Pulling the priest's cheeks, Klein grumbles that the church itself has already confirmed he has no abnormalities. Ignoring the protest, Garrison simply shoves the boy to the ground and responds to the commander with friendliness. The two talk in a friendly manner, while the fallen protagonist notices how the fanatic fakes normalcy around others. The priest turns his back and says he's leaving, showing he knows very well how to act socially. Before crossing the door, Garrison throws a very sharp sidelong glance in the young man's direction. The atmosphere gets tense when the old man justifies his actions by saying there's always a chance for a dangerous twist. After the dark warning, the man pauses briefly in the hallway. The priest makes a heart with his arms, reminding him of the next ritual, while Klein tells him to get lost. Quickly, the boy waves back just to ensure the unwanted visitor leaves soon. As soon as he is alone with his servants, the protagonist grabs his own hair in a burst of frustration. Slumped in the armchair, he questions how an official healer is allowed to torture people in such a barbaric way. Arin agrees that the old man looks like a muscular demon, but asks in total innocence if the master really isn't the villain. With a towel in hand, the boy laughs nervously and lies, saying no, because he can't even stand hearing that cursed name anymore. Right after drying his face, he thinks that if he admits the truth, he'll end up suffering even worse punishments. With the shadow of his past self projected on his back, he reflects on how he spent 7 years locked up and watched. Visibly irritated, He complains about the continuous persecution but acknowledges that the priest's high rank justifies everything. Curious about the conversation, the maid approaches, asking what this title of Exarch means. Seeing her doubt, Commander Dunkel takes the floor to explain the situation clearly. The knight clarifies that it is a title granted exclusively to the strongest person in the entire church. Down the hallway, the imposing figure of the priest proves that only the leader of the duchy can handle him. Impressed, Aaron praises the power of the noble family, making the boy agree with a tone of obviousness. While stroking the boy's hair, she asks curiously who would be the most powerful duke in the lineage. Clean rests his face on his hand to weigh the options and declares that the first leader was the strongest. The knight tries to argue in favor of the current patriarch, but he is quickly cut off by the master. With a very serious look, the protagonist reinforces the absolute supremacy of the founder with total conviction. Having no way to refute that sudden certainty, the commander just stays silent, observing the boy. Excitedly, the servant says she understands and comments that she always knew the young master preferred the original leader. She points out that he's always staring at the portrait, while Klein thinks the feeling is far from admiration. Dunkel flashes a nostalgic smile and comments on how time flies, remembering the founding of that house. In silence, the young man fixes his eyes on the small painting on the wall, absorbing the weight of 200 years. Totally focused, he confesses to himself that he still finds it hard to swallow this bizarre reality. The illustrious family lineage extends from the first generation to the current 7th Duke. At the top of this golden hierarchy, the familiar face of the great warrior of the past rests framed. That hero is none other than the first Duke, the legendary knight Berkel Rhineland. Facing his own fate, the Necromancer accepts the cruel irony of being reborn as the descendant of his killer. In his nightmares, he relives the exact moment he spat the enemy's name with pure hatred. The memory brings back the hero's cold and unshakable response before the fatal blow. The knight swings the blade, declaring that all of it was only for the future of the children. With no chance of defense, the severed head rolls across the snow-covered ground once again. With a sudden jump, Klein wakes up in the middle of the night, with his heart racing from the brutal memory. Already sitting on the luxurious bed, he takes a deep breath, trying to calm the nervousness that took over his body. The boy rubs his sweaty face, cursing the bad dream, and mentally reaffirms his own dark identity. However, he admits that his phase of blind fury that almost wiped the world off the map is in the past. Back then, he ended up decapitated in the cold snow, but opened his eyes 200 years in the future. Upon getting out of bed, he grumbles that he can't get used to this light, colored hair. Suddenly, the priest's deep voice warns that the boy was talking a lot of nonsense while sleeping. With a cynical smile, Garrison asks if he was dreaming about the villain's life, showing his crazy obsession. To maintain his cover, Klein pushes the maid, pretending he was just too exhausted the last few days. Furious and with clenched fists, Aaron states she heard everything, and that the young master was talking in his sleep. Remembering the dream where he ordered everyone killed, Klein tells the servant to shut up and asks when he said that kind of thing. At that, the butler Berkman enters the room, mentioning the sword demonstration, and thanking the maid for the report. Klein immediately imagines the terrifying figure of the priest, as the butler decrees the boy will have double purification sessions. Desperate with the situation, the protagonist quickly covers Aaron's mouth so she doesn't say anything else. The boy curses the crazy priest mentally, demanding that he stop pestering him. Already walking through the hallways, the boy gets confused and questions this sword demonstration. Walking just ahead, the butler confirms the info and mentions that the Duke ordered the young master's presence this time. Aaron eats a sweet happily beside Klein, who is still trying to understand why his own father wants him there. Berkman looks back while chewing something and asks if the servant is bothering the boy, but the master tells him to relax. With the girl devouring the food in pure joy, Klein just notices how much she seems to be enjoying all of it. Observing the large, luxurious hall, the protagonist finds it very strange that the Duke never called him for this before. To clarify the situation, the butler calmly explains that the Branch family has come for a visit. Absorbing the information, the young man lowers his head slightly and reflects on this group of distant relatives. Some nobles with mocking faces stare at the boy from afar, and he quickly realizes a very problematic bunch has just arrived. On the other side of the hall, one of the nobles laughs and tells the others to call the boy Lord Archimond instead of Klein. They mock the time the protagonist spent in the monastery, and he recognizes these idiots are his cousins on his father's side. Observing some chubby boys devouring meat, the young master deduces they must be from the northern branch. On the other side of the room, some silhouettes talk, and he remembers that's the group that came from the west. Among them, a very arrogant blonde girl rests comfortably in the main hall's armchair. One of the nobles assumes the boy can't hear the insults, while Klein tries to remember exactly who they are. The guys continue whispering behind the hare's back, calling the young man the trash of the Rhianland family. Irritated by the boldness, the protagonist throws a deadly look over his shoulder, mocking this idea of family unity. He turns his face and ignores their names, aware that these relatives only bark loud because the duchy is crumbling. The fact that they openly ignore a direct blood heir already says a lot about the current situation of that noble house. In the center of the room, two swordsmen trade swift blows during the long, awaited combat demonstration. Hit, the purple-haired boy retreats indignantly and screams his opponent's name with a lot of anger. This youth demands that his opponent stop underestimating him and fight seriously for once during practice. Without much effort, the other boy blocks a quick sequence of blows, while the attacker insists he isn't finished yet. Oozing confidence, the blonde just smiles and asks if that's true, being considered the only remaining hope for the family. Maintaining a calm posture, Dylan mocks the situation, being the protagonist's prodigy half-brother. Following the duel from afar, Clean reflects that the reputation of the house's swordsman only stays alive because of the blonde. Totally frustrated, the opponent attacks with all his might, swearing things will be different this time. With his eyes glowing a purple hue, the Necromancer focuses on the fight. As this is the first time he's seen swordsmanship since reincarnating, using precise movements, Dylan glides quickly across the floor to dodge the opponent's brute charge. The prodigy adjusts his stance in the blink of an eye, preparing his body for a lightning, fast counterattack. Wrapped in a yellowish energy, the youth jumps very high, catching the other swordsman completely off guard. Analyzing every detail of the scene, the protagonist focuses his gaze and realizes he can see everything clearly. Clean's mind processes the footwork, and even the exact moment the boy gets momentum from the ground. The purple-haired boy's eyes widen as he sees the enemy blade coming down toward him without any warning. Even the flow of mana becomes visible to the young lord, who recognizes the move as the secret art of the Rhineland family. In a brutal attack, Dylan uses the meteor sword technique and hits his opponent dead on against the ground. The impact ends the confrontation immediately, leaving the defeated youth lying in the center of the magic symbol. Staring at the loser, the winner reminds him that he had already warned, who was really in trouble in that dispute. The audience of nobles is marveled by the advanced technique and praises the incredible ability to execute that move in public. Scratching his face, Clint understands the fight was a warning of power to the relatives, but gets confused by what flashed in his vision. Suddenly, an animated voice calls the young lord's name in the middle of the well-lit hall. Dylan approaches, asking since when he was there, and the protagonist responds that he just arrived. All smiles, the older brother says he would have tried much harder if he knew the youngest was watching. Clean stares at the blonde, admiring how perfect he is in everything, and goes back to wondering about the real reason for that family visit. The boy suspects the cousins came to extort money again, when a deep voice praises Dylan's excellent work. Walking with great posture, Patriarch Heinkel congratulates his son for mastering the lineage's secret technique. The blonde makes a respectful bow, and Clean closely observes the man who leads the family he was reincarnated into. With a proud look, the father acknowledges all the hard effort of the young prodigy recently. Seeing the interaction between the two, the protagonist deduces the genius swordsman must be the Duke's last remaining pride. Beside them, Commander Dunkel exalts the boy's precision, classifying that natural talent as something overwhelming. A bit embarrassed by so much praise, Dylan smiles humbly and confesses he still needs to improve a lot. The patriarch recalls the final words of the great founding hero, demanding that his knights always be the greatest in the empire. Heinkel touches the boy's shoulder, telling him to carve that message in his heart and move forward with determination. Right after, the leader shifts his gaze and calls for his youngest son with a very calm tone of voice. Surprised by the sudden attention, the youth remains silent, waiting for what the leader of the duchy has to say. Slowly, the large man extends his hand toward his youngest son's head. Gently stroking the boy's hair, Heinkel confesses with sadness that he cannot feel any mana in him. Clean apologizes with his head down, internally lamenting being dead weight with no expectations for the future. The commander takes the blame and asks for forgiveness, remembering the boy lost his best years of training locked in the monastery. The distant relatives go back to gossiping, shocked that the second son has no magic, unlike his brother. They conclude the main lineage has become useless, giving the branch family a free pass to take control. Walking away from there, the protagonist makes it clear in his own mind that he doesn't care about the insults directed at him. But the memory of the hero Burkle stating he fought for the children's future returns forcefully to his head. Overcome with rage, the necromancer clenches his fist very tightly while listening to the background laughter. Revolted, he wonders how the founder risked his life for this trash, confirming that house has already reached its end. Before finally leaving the noble hall, the boy hears a kind farewell from his older half-brother. Already in the hallways, the loser of the duel blocks Clean's path, mocking an hare who doesn't even know how to use a sword. With a sadistic smile, the guy calls the protagonist a family embarrassment for acting like royalty while being useless. Without losing his cool, the boy stares at the mediocre relative and asks if picking up girls in secret is something to be proud of. Irritated, the noble asks if Clean thought money would stop the rumors about him, calling the boy a naive idiot. At that moment, heavy footsteps echo down the hall, accompanied by a voice questioning where such nonsense came from. Startled, the guy falls back on the floor, legs in the air, totally speechless before that intimidating presence. Furious, Commander Dunkel grabs the coward by the collar, warning that he shouldn't take out his defeat on the youngest. The man yells that this trash doesn't even know who his own mother is, leaving Klein completely silent. Hearing this, the protagonist throws a dark look over his shoulder and asks in a threatening tone what he just said. Faced with that oppressive aura, the arrogant relative starts breaking into a cold sweat, feeling genuine fear of the young master. The boy knows his anger isn't because of an unknown mother, but rather the superiority complex of this branch. Facing that disgrace, the necromancer mentally wonders how such a grand family managed to fall to such a low level. Remembering the final blow he took in the war, he questions why the lineage of the hero who killed him became this joke. After the brief outburst, the knight drops the loser on the floor at once and decrees the playtime has gone too far. With a firm posture, Dunkel clearly warns that he will no longer tolerate any kind of disrespect against the main heir. Totally humiliated and with no way out, the defeated swordsman just clicks his tongue in anger and accepts the scolding. While the useless guy leaves, the commander tells him to consider himself lucky for surviving thanks to the intervention. Suddenly, the knight is startled to see Klein reaching toward the sword scabbard to take it. Observing the blades shine with great attention, the protagonist gets focused and decides to act immediately. Catching Dunkel's attention, he asks casually if the man has any spare swords to lend him. Later that same night, silence dominates the surroundings of the massive noble family estate. The commander hands the weapon to the young master, but doesn't hide his curiosity about the reason for that request. Standing in the middle of the dark training field, Klein just murmurs while assessing the equipment's weight in his hands. Moving the blade, the boy tries to remember how Delin used that meteor technique and questions the knight about it. Already assuming a combat stance, the boy warns he needs to confirm a detail and tells the man to step in first. Watching from afar, Dunkel becomes reflective and concludes the young just hasn't given up on the path of the sword after all. However, he laments that it's too late for the youth, as someone without magic could never become an official knight. Furthermore, the man thinks the meteor technique was created by the Duke himself, making it impossible to just mimic the stance. Concentrated, the necromancer closes his eyes and realizes that entire fight from earlier is still absurdly alive in his mind. He can mentally relive with perfection the positioning and the exact footwork of his half-brother. Going over the details, the youth focuses on the exact timing of the momentum from the ground and the trajectory the slashing blow made in the air. The level of perception of that body is so absurd that he understands even the exact flow of mana used in the skill. When he opens his eyes again, a purple magical glow radiates from the protagonist's pupils in the middle of the darkness. Feeling a sudden pressure in the air, the knight turns his back, taking a huge startle at the change in atmosphere. An absurd energy hits the man, who immediately recognizes the grandeur of that mysterious power. Widening his eyes in pure shock, he refuses to believe what is about to happen on the field. In an explosive movement, Klein perfectly reproduces the family's secret technique, firing off a colossal purple slash. The dark mana of the former Dark Lord flows intensely through the boy's sharp vision during the surprise attack. The protagonist stands peacefully while a massive aura of power emanates from his entire body without much effort. The destructive impact of the blow shatters the scenery's rocks under Dunkel's disbelieving gaze in the middle of the smoke. Trying to process that miracle, the commander just babbles the master's title, not understanding how a useless person did that. With a confident smile, Klein stares at the scene, stunned by the fact that his own cheap copy worked so well. Later that day, little Aaron wears a dazed face, not quite understanding what's going on in the room. Priest Garrison breaks into a cold sweat and wears a very tense expression while performing another of his punitive purifications. Staring at the bottom of the bubbling bucket, the old priest refuses to believe the boy's massive resistance in the water. Celebrating like a madman, he mentions the young master managed to hold his breath for over 1 minute. Klein pulls his head out of the water, gasping for air in desperation, yelling if the nutjob wants to do the next ritual in an aquarium. Complaining about the extra torture, the boy hears Garrison laugh, justifying that he felt a very sinister energy coming from him. Indignant, the protagonist questions if he needs to suffer that abuse just because of a bad feeling from the priest. At that, Dunkel enters the hall holding a mysterious letter and calls the boy, with a very serious expression on his face. Drying his wet hair, Klein asks who the message is from, and the knight explains that the defeated cousin sent it. Immediately the boy raises an eyebrow, suspicious of that nice guy change in attitude from yesterday's coward. Assessing the piece of paper in his hands, he murmurs thoughtfully while trying to decipher the true intention behind the text. The message is an invitation to a hunting competition, something that sounds totally out of character for that disgusting relative. Analyzing the situation, the hare concludes that Dalton just needs a lame excuse to drag him out of the mansion. The commander wants to know if he intends to attend, and the youth calmly responds that he sees no reason to refuse the offer. Casting a very dark sidelong glance, the necromancer mentally states that the situation could be quite favorable for him. After all, the protagonist acknowledges that he now holds a very broken ace up his sleeve to defend himself alone. He spent the last few hours replaying the meteor technique in his own mind thousands of times to lock in the learning. With this intensive mental training, the platinum-haired boy finally reached an impressive conclusion. He discovered he can copy any type of skill with total perfection just by looking at the technique a single time. Understanding the Lord wants to test his new capabilities, the commander remains silent for a brief moment, weighing the idea. Without asking more questions, Dunkel agrees with the risky plan and says he will prepare the carriage for this hunting trip. Out of nowhere, Garrison appears, announcing he will also participate in the outing, making Clean furious with this stalking. Maintaining a cynical expression, the old man asks if he hadn't already made the message very clear earlier that morning. Staring at the boy with a heavy gaze, the priest justifies all the insistence on going along by focusing on that same excuse. During the carriage ride toward the west, the priest swears up and down that he felt suspicious energy coming from the boy. However, the path along the bumpy dirt road shakes the vehicle enough to make the giant man very seasick. Unable to stand the motion sickness, the big guy sticks his head in a paper bag, vomiting everything while the protagonist watches in disgust. Sighing with weariness, Clean mentions that's exactly why he tried to forbid him from going, offering a cushion. He explains that the western forest terrain is very rugged, making that route terrible for first-time travelers. Handing over the object, the boy guarantees that malaise will pass if the old man simply closes his eyes and rests a bit. Garrison almost cries with emotion, thinking the boy has grown up, but the master kills the mood by telling him to pass the item to Aaron. After the mess in the carriage finally ends, the youth rests his face on his hand and starts observing the view through the small side window. Seeing the peaceful scenery outside, he internally reflects that the entire region changed quite drastically. In his bloody memories of the past, the necromancer remembers that field covered only by corpses under dense snow. To him, it's impressive to see that frozen land prospered after so much chaos, becoming a vibrant environment today. With his mind wandering far, the former Dark Lord admits that all of it was only possible through Burkel's sacrifice. Opening the carriage door, Dunkel tells the young Master Clean that they have finally reached the planned destination. Observing the massive and luxurious Cornwell family estate ahead, the boy realizes the trip is over. Impressed by the size of the place, the protagonist questions if that's really where the coward Dalton lives. He notices the secondary mansion is even more extravagant than the main one, showing they have plenty of money to splurge. Furthermore, the boy thinks it's absurd to spend so many resources just to organize a simple hunting competition for kids. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls Clean's name, totally interrupting his line of reasoning about the spending. Holding two fierce hunting dogs, Dalton approaches with a cynical smile, asking what his cousin is looking at so intently. The noble brags about the well-built construction and doesn't hide that it was all erected with money extorted from the main family. With a mocking tone, the arrogant relative assumes the former monastery prisoner has no clue how the real world works. Ignoring the provocation, Clay notices the dogs are skin and bones and questions, since when the event turned into chat time. Laughing at his cousin's impatience, the host guarantees he already foresaw all this haste, and therefore came fully prepared for the event. Without wasting time, the guy snaps his fingers, demanding the protagonist pay close attention to what's about to happen next. With the signal given, the dogs bolt furiously toward the forest, marking the official start of the long-awaited competition. Dalton calmly explains that he scattered several bloody baits around the central mountain region to attract the animals. He details that the scent of a starving dog is tens of thousands of times more powerful than that of a normal human. Wielding a crossbow, the noble explains that he shoots the beasts at the exact moment they run desperately, smelling the meat. Immediately, a well-aimed arrow hits one of the dogs running through the dense forest dead on. With the brutal impact, the other beasts begin to howl in pain, as they are also targeted without any mercy. Seeing the slaughter, Dalton bursts out laughing and celebrates the success of his cowardly hunting strategy before the guests. Startled by all that gratuitous cruelty, little Aaron calls for her master, catching the attention of the sadistic host. The guy approaches and strokes the maid's head, immediately recognizing her as the companion who lives glued to the boy. Wearing a malicious smile, he belittles her and tells the girl to follow him, promising to give her a very different service. At that exact moment, Clean grabs the meddling relative's wrist very tightly, preventing any further approach. Surprised by the sudden attitude, the noble hesitates, while the protagonist coldly orders him to take his hands off his maid. With a deadly look, the former necromancer threatens to break the guy's arm if he doesn't release the girl immediately. Backing off in a startle, the purple-haired boy pulls his arm back quickly and lets out a nervous little laugh of indignation. While walking away irritated toward his own horse, Dalton grumbles about the youngest's overbearing and arrogant posture. Without wasting more time with arguments, he quickly mounts the saddle of his steed, prepared to depart. Already mounted, the host calls the boy to follow him into the forest, warning in a mocking tone that it's dangerous to walk alone. Clean also mounts his horse and orders Dunkel to stay there looking after little Aaron until he returns from the suspicious ride. Worried about the hare's safety, the commander suggests going along, showing a magic scroll in his hand. The item is a disposable artifact capable of transmitting an immediate emergency signal as soon as it is torn by the user. The protagonist understands it would be very suspicious if his personal bodyguard entered the forest and ended up vanishing out of nowhere. Displaying a magic crest on his right hand, the boy tells Dunkel to tear the paper without a second thought if things go wrong. Trusting the knight's loyalty, the young master gallops off into the trees, leaving the duo behind at the mansion. Observing the boy's departure, Priest Garrison maintains an unusually serious and silent expression in the courtyard. Time passes quickly, and soon the orange sky gives way to a dark and starry night over the mountainous forest. Riding along the enclosed trail, Clean calculates that the target shouldn't be far from there, and continues following the visible tracks. Suddenly, the boy pulls the reins, surprised to hear Dalton's voice echoing through the darkness, confirming his arrival. The coward is sitting nonchalantly on the body of a killed animal, holding his sword while questioning the delay. Getting off the horse very calmly, the protagonist stares at the crazy relative, wanting to know what the big plan is this time. Drawing his own blade in a swift movement, the hare prepares for any surprise attack coming from the darkness. Just ahead, several lifeless horses appear thrown on the ground, showing the trail of destruction left by the shooter. Without showing remorse, the noble states that macabre scenery is just the grand final event of today's competition. With his eyes wide in pure insanity, Dalton points the weapon at the youngest, declaring he will be his ultimate prey. Clean repeats the threat in disbelief, while the opponent swears to cut his head off to throw it straight at the prodigy Dellen's feet. Faced with such stupidity, the necromancer laments the pathetic state of his current family, considering them an empty shell without power. At that, several armed men emerge from the forest shadows, and Dalton guarantees the boy won't even have a chance to react to the siege. The thugs smile sinisterly, while the ambush leader states with conviction that the duchy already belongs to them in fact. Several archers positioned on the rocks aim at the lone boy, telling him to curse his own useless blood before dying. Analyzing the entire trap set around him, the protagonist turns his face slightly and coldly agrees with the statement. Oozing confidence, the killer celebrates that tomorrow the entire continent will be laughing at the great fall of the House of Swordsman. With a wicked smile, he savors the idea of spreading cruel rumors claiming the young lord became cheap dog food. Immediately, the memory of the legendary hero Burka resurfaces in Clean's mind, recalling the old speech about the children's future. Remembering this bitter irony, the platinum-haired boy ends up letting out a muffled laugh at the ridiculous situation of the lineage. Unable to contain himself, the former villain puts his hand to his face and explodes in a loud laugh that echoes through the silent forest. The guy gets completely confused by that hysterical reaction and irritably asks if the victim has lost his mind before death. Wiping away a tear from the corner of his eye, the youth gradually recovers his composure and leaves a sentence hanging in the air with a threatening tone. Half of Clean's face darkens and his eyes glow an intense red, while he calls his cousin a bold brat. Feeling an overwhelming pressure take over the environment, the coward starts breaking into a cold sweat instantly, losing all his tough guy act. Staring at the human trash in front of him, the Dark Lord questions how they dare profane the lineage that was built at the cost of his end. A storm of dark energy begins to spiral uncontrollably around the protagonist's small body in the middle of the clearing. Terrified, Dalton stammers, asking how the useless one is using spells without having mana, but the monster warns that it isn't magic. Totally wrapped in the terrifying shadows, the necromancer decrees with a deep voice that this is pure demonic energy. The hired thugs panic upon seeing the disturbing scene, wondering what kind of aberration that boy is after all. Widening his eyes in absolute shock, the ambush leader finally processes the words and understands the gravity of the situation. With a scary smile illuminated by green flames, the Lord immediately summons the ancient evil spirits buried in time. Pulling power from the depths of his soul, he demands that the lost souls rise to serve him again under the authority of his true name. Commanded by the absolute will of the reincarnated villain, Dozens of cadaverous skulls begin to emerge from the flames, ordering them to devour everything. The dark entities multiply quickly across the forest floor, thirsty for blood and crazy to annihilate the prey around them. Trembling from head to toe, Dalton refuses to believe the myth of the shadows is real, connecting the dots in desperation. An entire army of macabre skeletons rises behind the youth, while the cousin screams the name of the legendary Necromancer. Extending his hand forward with a purely devilish look, the boy orders the creatures to destroy every single enemy in the place. Facing the imminent slaughter, the former lord reflects in the dark that he believed he had forgotten this kind of violent feeling. But, hearing the cries of terror mixing with the sound of rattling bones, the old aura of the mortal villain resurfaces with full force in the night. Isolated in the darkness, the protagonist reflects that 200 years have passed like an infinite stretch of days. But at the bottom of this void, he can clearly feel an energy echoing non-stop. The voices of the dead call out for him in the darkness, and the necromancer accepts this call with pleasure. This familiar resonance brings back deep memories of his past life. Covering his blood-stained face, the boy enjoys that wonderful nostalgic sensation. Breaking into a cold sweat of desperation, Dalton refuses to believe what he is seeing in front of him. One of the mercenaries screams the name of the famous Dark Lord upon seeing the cadaverous army rising from the ground. Oozing cruelty, Kling confirms that was exactly what they used to call him in the past. The thugs are in shock as they realize the rumors about the possession weren't just legends. They notice in terror that these summoned creatures have completely black bones, emanating a red aura from its eyes. One of the skeletons murmurs the order to kill the targets. Dalton stays completely silent, unable to process the absurd disadvantage of the situation. Trying to relieve the tension, a mercenary laughs nervously and calls the creatures just a bunch of useless bones. The protagonist lowers his gaze with a dark face upon hearing his own army belittled that way. Dalton recovers his confidence, stating he's already crushed hundreds of those trash in missions, but questions their black color. The coward ignores the danger warning and announces they'll take one of those bones home as a souvenir. Right after, he orders the men to first deal with the monsters that are blocking the way. Pulling the strings with force, the archers aim directly at the undead horde. The ambush leader tells the long-range units to prepare the lightning-fast attack. At that, the thugs load the heavy combat crossbows as fast as possible. Without hesitating, the group's commander screams the order to open fire against the lone enemy. A massive rain of arrows cuts through the forest skies, going straight toward Klain. The projectiles fall at an absurd speed to finish off the knight's main target. Focused on the combat, the young lord's eyes shine with intense magical energy. The dozens of arrows lodge into the muddy ground without hitting anything important. Believing in his own victory, Dalton laughs out loud, imagining his cousin became a perforated target. However, his joy quickly vanishes upon realizing the attack had no effect. A solid barrier formed right in front of the boy, blocking every single enemy projectile. The black skeletons use their own bodies as shields to protect the Dark Lord from the ambush. With a sadistic look, Kling concludes that 200 years is enough time for people to forget about his army. The shooters are perplexed to see the monsters form a perfect defense out of nowhere. Staring at the thugs, the boy understands they must think these are just common skeletons. Totally sure of himself, the protagonist makes it very clear that his summons are very different. Dalton is completely paralyzed by fear as he is told to pay close attention. Immediately, Kling orders the first unit to break the defensive formation and advance. He remembers with disgust the hero Burkle stating he needed to kill him to protect the North's future. Clenching his fists in fury, the necromancer swears to crush with his own hands those who mock that sacrifice. The cadaverous monsters bolt at high speed to fulfill their lord's merciless order. Seeing the brutal charge, the coward panics, questioning since when creatures like that could run. A terrifying wave of undead floods the forest, thirsty for the blood of the enemies present. A mercenary tries to calm the troop, telling everyone to maintain their stance against the beasts, but he barely finishes his sentence before taking a deep cut to the chest, spitting a lot of blood. The dark summons rip through the human defensive lines in a true pitiless massacre. Dalton curses in desperation as he sees his professional killers being decimated so easily. With no way out, he demands the second unit of crossbowmen surround the skeletons to try and contain the advance. The thugs on the ground look up and notice a new threat emerging through the treetops. Some skeletons are already positioned on the high branches with ballistae ready to fire. Desperate, a mercenary warns the beasts have long-range weapons and tells everyone to run. Maintaining a cold expression, Kling just whispers the command to fire against the fleeing targets. Several lethal bolts rip through the air simultaneously toward the enemy group. The rain of iron pierces the backs of the men who were trying to escape that death trap. Cries of pure agony echo through the clearing as the killers fall one by one on the dark ground. The force of the impact knocks down the remaining mercenaries, turning the place into a true bloodbath. Watching the extermination, Dalton breaks into a cold sweat, recognizing those monsters are way too lethal. Fearing being completely annihilated, the coward tells the survivors to drop the bows and go for direct confrontation. He yells with all his might, asking if the useless thugs aren't listening to his orders. Suddenly, the noble turns his face and glares at a skeleton approaching from behind. Charging with a heavy sword, he curses the damned creature, swearing to finish it. Taking advantage of an opening, the swordsman lands a clean hit that rips the monster's head off in the blink of an eye. Dalton laughs victoriously, celebrating that aiming for the head was always the weak point of these things. Even without a head, the creature's bony body stays firm on its feet with the weapon in hand. The noble gasps in fear, as he was absolutely sure that decapitating one of them would solve the problem. Oozing irony, Klain reminds the idiot relative that he had already warned about the difference of his servants. The decapitated skeleton calmly bends down to pick up its own skull from the grass. On the ground, the skull's eye glows intensely with red dark energy. Dalton is paralyzed with horror as he sees the beast put its own head back in place. The protagonist mentally explains that spirits summoned with demonic energy do not die from physical blows. Totally reconstructed, the monster lets out a terrifying roar, ready to continue the night massacre. A thug retreats in terror as these reincarnated aberrations follow complex combat tactics. The Macabre army corners the remaining mercenaries, proving why Archimonde dominated the continent in the past. Observing the general despair, the boy laments that his current summon limit in this body is only 11 units. Maintaining an intimidating pose, he calmly asks his cousin if they should continue with that, unt. While chaos reigns among the mountain trees, the night remains dark and pitiless. Far away, the luxury fountain at the main mansion gushes water, peacefully under the moonlight while laughter echoes. Priest Garrison falls into a fit of laughter, confirming to little Aaron that the young lord really used to do absurd things at the monastery. Garrison laughs while talking to little Aaron, finding the whole situation very funny. With a kind smile, the old priest comments on how much the servant seems to like the young master. Chewing happily, the girl confirms without hesitation that she likes him a lot. Back in the dark forest, one of the mercenaries desperately begs for the lord to stop the massacre. Panting and trembling with fear, the thug asks if the boy knows how incredible he really is. Immediately, a skeleton pierces the man with a fatal blow while Aaron's voice echoes, saying her master is kind. Blood gushes far from the brutal impact, contrasting with the memory of the servant, praising the cookies she gets from him. All innocent, the maid states with conviction that Klain is the warmest person in the whole world. With his face stained with enemy blood, the protagonist coldly extends his hand in the middle of the slaughter. Following the villain's implacable command, the macabre summons shred the remaining mercenaries without mercy. Fighting for his own life, Dalton blocks a heavy charge from one of the creatures with great difficulty. Cursing in rage, the cowardly noble swings his sword with all his might and manages to push the monster back. However, the black skeleton recovers at once, showing that simple hits are of no use. Out of breath and furious, the cousin swears he'll find a way to stop these bone plagues from regenerating. At that, the swordsman spots the lord standing peacefully from afar and realizes he is the key to ending it. While dodging the creature's furious attacks, the killer deduces victory is certain if he can eliminate their master. Seizing a gap, Dalton charges it clean with everything, wielding his sword and screaming his name. Completely delusional, the arrogant relative yells that the game with harmless corpses ends right there. Bringing down the blade with full force for a fatal blow, the noble decrees that all the undead will vanish once the boy dies. At that exact millisecond, the protagonist's eye glows intensely with purple dark magic energy. Maintaining absolute calm, the young lord states to himself that he can perfectly see all of the enemy's movements. Using the power of this enhanced vision, he draws his own sword, which is already totally wrapped in a destructive dark aura. The memory of his half-brother's demonstration resurfaces clearly, allowing the boy to reproduce the technique seen only once. The swordsman widens his eyes in pure shock as he recognizes the stance of the Rhineland family's secret art being set against him. In a lightning-fast movement, Klain executes the meteor sword technique and fires off a colossal slash toward the target. The attack hits the noble dead on before he could react, leaving the guy completely confused and spitting blood. With a demonic look, the Dark Lord warns that the trash won't have an easy death, as the real punishment has only just begun. With no strength to stay upright, the cousin collapses on the ground defeated, while the protagonist agrees with his theory. The old villain explains that if the conjurer dies, all creatures lose power, and it was through that weakness that he lost in the past. However, Klain finds it a great irony of fate that the feared lord who used only demonic energy has received a new chance like this. Gripping the weapon's hilt firmly, he acknowledges it was precisely the power of the enemy family that saved him now. The protagonist understands that the Rhineland blood running through his veins only made him even stronger than before. The Necromancer warns that since he was born into this body, He can no longer simply ignore the problems of this noble house. Lying on the bloody grass and feeling great pain, the coward desperately asks what those weird words mean. Ignoring the useless prey on the ground, the platinum-haired boy tells the hero Burkle to wait and see what he will do. Observing the deplorable state of the lineage, the reincarnated one swears he will rebuild this bankrupt family with his own hands. Some time passes, and Dalton gradually regains consciousness with a groan of pain, opening his eyes in a strange place. The surrounding darkness is total, leaving the prisoner completely disoriented and unable to see absolutely anything. Trying to move, the noble feels the icy touch of metal binding his wrists and arms firmly to a structure. He hears the sound of rattling chains and notices his legs are also bound, making any kind of escape impossible. Strapped to a macabre torture chair, the killer lets out a murmur of confusion as a red light illuminates the room. A flash reveals Klain sitting in an imposing armchair right in front of him, coldly noting that his canoeing relative has finally awakened. With Archimonde's soul reflecting in his posture, the boy explains that this is the place where souls go when they die. Going into shock at the dark revelation, Dalton babbles, asking if that place is the feared afterlife created by the Necromancer. The protagonist confirms and recalls the prisoner's sins, citing the tortured dogs and the atrocities committed as hunting. Even bound, Dalton explodes in rage and tells his cousin to make sense, demanding to be untied immediately. Suddenly, the noble's mind processes the combat memories, and he freezes upon remembering a very important detail. The image of the lightning, fast blow hitting him dead, on resurfaces in his head, bringing the certainty that he suffered a mortal wound. Confused, the youth analyzes his own body and questions how he can be completely whole after that attack. Terror takes over the coward, who starts breaking into a cold sweat and screams that it's impossible, telling the monster to stop the madness. Summoning a magic flame in his hand, Klain states with great tranquility that it doesn't matter if the trash believes the situation or not. Surrounded by hellhounds drooling with hunger, the Lord decrees that the only thing that matters is that the time to pay for his sins has arrived. Seeing the monstrous beast snarling in his direction, the prisoner completely loses the color in his face in pure desperation. Showing sharp fangs, the macabre creatures bark violently, ready to shred the flesh of the helpless one. The vengeful souls of those victims who suffered at his hands manifest in the beasts, bringing weight to the punishment. Pulling the chair chains with all his might, the noble tries to escape uselessly, while the necromancer tells him to listen. Without any mercy, the dogs begin to devour the prisoner alive, ripping out hallucinating screams of pain from the depths of his soul. Being torn apart, he cries, begging for help, feeling in his own skin the exact suffering he caused others for years. Tears of blood run from the condemned man's eyes, symbolizing the eternal pain of that cruel punishment in the dark underworld. The Lord observes the relative being slowly consumed, coldly warning that hell was built by his own actions. Back in the real world, Klain stays standing in the middle of the forest in absolute silence, processing everything he just did. The black skeletons wait obediently right behind the master until he turns his face, feeling something needs to be finalized. Wrapped in a cyan magic energy, the protagonist tells the undead he will grant the reward for them having helped him. Like magic, he breaks the curse that bound the spirits in that state, freeing the corrupted souls at once. Small particles of bluish light float gently through the air, marking the peaceful departure of those suffering entities. The entire forest is illuminated by this comforting glow, while the young lord watches the army vanish with the night breeze. Seeing the souls ascend to the heavens, he reflects that definitive death is exactly that, when bones scatter in the wind. Staring at the pile of mercenary corpses on the muddy ground, the villain again wonders about the purpose of his resurrection. Suddenly, a mysterious voice cuts the silence, congratulating the boy, who quickly turns around upon noticing the approach. With a sharp look and combat posture, the young master deduces the intruder must have seen everything and demands to know who he is. Revealing a cynical smile under the ragged hood, the sinister man carries green magic and warns that his name doesn't matter. The mysterious villain mocks the Lord's intelligence, stating he wouldn't be able to understand things even if he explained. Surprisingly, one of the fallen mercenaries begins to glow with dark energy and starts moving again under command. The corpse's eyes gain a supernatural aspect, proving another person on that mountain master's manipulation spells. In a brutal movement, the unknown necromancer raises zombies from the mud, starting a terrible new confrontation in the middle of the slaughter. Observing the battlefield, one of the mercenaries realizes the boy is using resurrection arts to control the dead. The thug sighs in relief upon understanding the target is a necromancer, thinking the corpses on the ground will still be very useful to them. The sadistic and echoing laugh of the killer breaks the tense silence of the dark mountain. Meanwhile, at the main mansion, Aaron calls Commander Dunkel excitedly to hear the hilarious stories of the master's childhood. However, the man ignores the girl completely and warns with a distant tone that he will listen to that conversation later. Holding the signaling scroll, the bodyguard wonders why the young lord used an item made only for emergencies. 3 hours have already passed since the hunt in the forest began, which leaves Dunkel with a very bad feeling about the situation. Unable to stand the agony of waiting anymore, the commander decides to go after the boy, but is interrupted by a local watchman. The man warns that it would be a big problem if he abandoned his post now, and suggests he wait a bit longer for the end of the event. Faced with this sudden meddling, the knight just stares at the subject in total silence with a sharp look. Noticing the soldier's armor, he recognizes the Cornwell family crest and confirms they are Dalton's personal guards. With that, Dunkel concludes they really were up to something the whole time, and reaffirms his position as protector of the Mainhere. Exuding a threatening aura, the knight makes it very clear he will no longer stay put if they try to stop him again. Intimidated by the absurd pressure, the secondary family trash guard just swallows hard without being able to respond. Right after, Aaron asks worriedly if something happened, and the commander asks her to pay close attention to what he's about to say. Directly, Dunkel instructs the little servant to return to the safety of the mansion accompanied by the priest first. Confused by the request, Aaron mentions the priest just vanished without saying anything, and with a very strange expression. Surprised, the commander remembers the fanatic complaining about a sinister aura earlier and realizes this disappearance is very suspicious. Understanding the gravity of the situation, the bodyguard curses loudly while quickly mounting his horse. Galloping at full speed down the road, he is absolutely certain that all this confusion is not just a coincidence. The strong wind hits the knight's face, who now has the conviction that the young master fell into a terrible trap. Back in the western forest, the protagonist's horde of undead waits silently in the middle of the fog. Panning, Klain notices his demonic energy has completely exhausted in the last clash, and he can't use any more necromancy. Feeling the physical weight of exhaustion, the former villain laments that he won't be able to last long fighting in that fragile body. Taking advantage of the opponent's apparent wariness, the mercenary leader points his finger, ordering the group's immediate advance. The killer yells for his thugs to eliminate the young master once, and for all without giving him a chance to react. Preparing his own magic, the guy mocks, thinking the boy was very stupid to try and kill them using the same dark arts. With a sinister snap, the moon crest on the mercenary's hand begins to glow, emanating intense magical power. Answering the call of that macabre spell, several armed zombies leap from the shadows to annihilate the Mainhere. Cornered, the protagonist's eyes widen while the adversary celebrates, decreeing he is totally finished. Suddenly, the mercenary's expression of superiority vanishes, replaced by a look of pure shock at the sudden flash. Ripping through the night's darkness, a colossal pillar of golden light plunges directly from the heavens toward the combat. The overwhelming impact of the divine magic completely obliterates the dark beasts that were advancing against the protagonist. With his eyes glowing in pure holy fury, Priest Garrison emerges in the middle of the chaos, crying out for the light to grant peace to the dead. A massive explosion of purifying energy sweeps the evil creatures off the map, as if they were absolutely nothing. The giant's imposing silhouette stands out in the clearing, while he warns the young master that now he can crest easy. Trembling in terror before that demonstration of absurd power, the killer retreats and asks, stammering, who this monster is. In response, the old man shows an extremely threatening face, ready to deliver his own divine judgment on the battlefield. Imposing, Garrison officially introduces himself as the Exarch of the Holy Order and warns the real fight has just begun. In the church hierarchy, this title belongs to only 3 human weapons who swore to execute the absolute will of the Pope himself. As the Order's ultimate combat force, they are the only ones capable of wielding the great holy armament left by the ancient saint. The destructive grandeur of these warriors is so vast that rumors claim each one carries the power of an entire fortress. Blinded by the divine glow, the thug leader covers his face with his arms, trying to protect himself from the insane wind that took over the place. More light rays plunge from the dark sky, mercilessly crushing the rest of the enemy summons that still tried to fight. Gritting his teeth in pure hatred, the mercenary stares at the intruder and asks which of those 3 legends he is, after all. Observing the priest's posture, Klain notices he is in the presence of the one who carries the title of being the strongest in martial prowess. Oozing confidence, Garrison stares at the threat and repeats that the young lord can relax, as he has finally arrived. Interrupting the conversation, one of the thug's undead creatures takes a step forward, snarling at the invader. In the blink of an eye, the fanatic charges at a simply terrifying speed to intercept the creature head-on. The terrifying zombie barely has time to scream before being hit by the divine big man's lightning-fast charge. Wrapped in holy energy, the priest punch rips the target's head off with absurd ease, shattering bones in all directions. Delivering a crushing hook to an entire group, the Exarch yells for all the sinners present to listen to his words. With his eye illuminated by the order's power, he tells the beast to seek forgiveness immediately through prayer. Completely uncontrolled, Garrison grabs an enemy by the neck and slams him into the ground, promising to grant a true baptism of fire. The survivors try to flee in desperation, but the priest catches up to them, swearing to wash away all the sins of that bunch of useless trash. Without backing down a millimeter, the human monster steps hard on the muddy earth, getting momentum for the next attack. A frantic and brutal sequence of divine punches destroys multiple targets simultaneously, while the man decrees that this is his mercy. Raising a colossal holy Babel made of pure light, the fanatic smashes the ground, declaring that this is his final judgment. Breaking into a cold sweat, the ambush leader wonders what on earth an exarch is doing in a place as isolated as that. Facing the absolute carnage of his own troops, the thug is in disbelief at the power gaps separating them from that cleric. Aware of imminent defeat, the killer turns tail and flees in desperation, cursing the fact that none of that was in the initial deal. Running for his life, the guy grumbles that level of brute force simply makes no sense and is a great injustice. But desperation blinds him, and the mercenary leader ends up tripping and falling to his knees in the middle of the cold mud. Before even getting up, he notices Garrison's giant figure looming right behind his back, wanting to know where he was going. In a pitiless movement, the priest grabs the runaway's head with a single hand, making the poor guy scream in pure agony from the grip. With a totally empty look, the man ignores the victim's crying and coldly warns that today's prayer hasn't ended yet. Crushing the mercenary's skull bit by bit, the fanatic tells the sinner to be very grateful for the wonderful judgment he just received. Finishing the dirty job, Garrison plunges the enemy's body into the forest floor in a violent crash in the name of the divine light. The absurd force of the impact kicks up a cloud of dust and throws the ambush leader's remains into the air. What's left of the thug's equipment rolls across the blood-stained grass until it stops completely, marking the end of the massacre. Watching everything in silence, Clean swallows hard while hearing the priest's heavy voice calling his name from afar. The boy recalls the bizarre scene, noting the giant old man destroyed the entire army just by walking and attacking in a straight line. For the first time since reincarnating, the former villain is truly intimidated just by the wind pressure generated by that man's attacks. Totally perplexed, the protagonist processes the information that over 20 enemies were just shredded in a matter of seconds. Emerging from the middle of the dense darkness, the cleric extends a blood-covered hand toward the hare with a terrifying posture. With the field covered in blood, Garrison comments that he came running here as soon as he felt the necromancy aura. Maintaining a serene expression on his scarred face, the old priest states that this whole situation is very strange. The boy stays immobile and quite tense while the exarch closely analyzes the dark energy left at the site. Assessing the scene, the cleric concludes that the sinister power he felt before doesn't seem to come from the young master. Breaking into a cold sweat of nervousness, the protagonist curses the fanatic in his own mind. Grabbing his own injured arm, Klein deduces that if he makes a single false move, he will be killed right there. At that, a distressed voice echoes, cutting the dawn's tension and calling for the noble hare. Mounted on a horse, Commander Dunkel appears desperately, asking if the boy is okay. Surprised by the unexpected arrival, the Lord just murmurs the bodyguard's name. With his face bleeding, the former villain admits mentally that using heavy spells took an excessively high price. Seeing the boy's deplorable state up close, the knight's eyes widen, and he screams in shock. Immediately, Dunkel leaps from his mount and runs across the dark terrain toward his ward. The man catches the youth as his legs give out, while asking in terror what caused that bloodbath. Very confused by the bizarre scene, the commander immediately looks for Dalton, but the Lord looks away in silence. Under the faint moonlight, the boy coldly confesses he took the life of his own cowardly relative. Everything shifts to a large noble hall the next day, with Clean justifying that he acted only because the guy tried to kill him. Immediately, a hand slams hard on the table, echoing furious indignation through the place. Count Delkin, leader of the Cornwall family, rages, asking if the brat dares accuse the late Dalton of murder. In the middle of the large assembly, the man laments his loyal son's death and thinks it's absurd they're trying to frame him this way. One of the nobles present interrupts the scene, suggesting everyone focus on finding the true culprit of the tragedy. However, a long-haired lord holds up a document and highlights that Clean kept the same testimony after hours of interrogation. Staring at the count, the man reveals a record proving 20 mercenaries were sent by Delkin and vanished the same night. Sweating from nervousness at the proof, the branch leader mentally curses his thugs for leaving tracks behind. On the other side of the room, someone argues that the story still makes no sense, since the Kusless boy never even held a sword. The other Suits agree, remembering the patriarch Heinkel himself confirmed the absence of mana in the youngest. Seeing the situation has spun out of control, Delkin realizes he will be totally ruined if they discover he planned the ambush. Trying to turn the tables, he lowers his face and proposes that everyone analyze the young master's suspicious character. The Count recalls the old rumors about the boy's mother, and his madness claiming to be a necromancer since birth. The long-haired noble tells the leader to control his tongue before spreading so much nonsense in an important meeting. Completely out of control, Delkin accuses Cleen of hiring killers to shift the blame to his son, but he is interrupted. Taking a huge startle at the sudden shout, the Count turns his face in terror to see who just interfered. Walking to the center of the hall, the hare warns he's already heard enough lies and will no longer tolerate it. With tranquility, Cleen repeats that he only defended himself from the attempt, and also reminds them that Priest Garrison witnessed everything. The desperate relative accuses the boy of lying through his teeth, but the protagonist throws the question back in a challenging tone. Giving a wicked smile, the necromancer ironically thinks to himself that then the story of him being the Dark Lord must be true. While the Count grinds his teeth in pure rage, the youth recalls the promise he made after executing the coward. With a focused and dark look, he swears to protect and rebuild that family without letting the parasites destroy it. Suddenly, loud knocks on the hall's giant doors totally interrupt the meeting's tense atmosphere. The doors open slowly, accompanied by a very confident female voice apologizing for the delay. Walking with great posture, Leia, the great commander of the Order of the Holy Spear, makes an imposing entrance at the sight. Observing the newcomer out of the corner of his eye, Cleen finds her presence there strange, since she didn't even appear in previous training. Some suits whisper that the matter doesn't concern her lineage, but Patriarch Heinkel mentions he authorized her entry. The long-haired noble clarifies that the late Dalton used to accept direct missions from her cavalry in the past. Because of this direct professional connection, the man confirms the commander has every right to participate in the judgment. Right after the explanation, the blonde scans the entire room with an extremely sharp and intimidating look. Walking near the protagonist, the knightess fixes her eyes on him without saying a single word. The young lord is totally confused when the woman asks permission to speak privately with him. While one of those present questions the reason for the request, the boy's father authorizes the departure, as long as it's a quick talk. The patriarch tells his son to accompany the visitor without delay, leaving the youth with a drop of sweat on his face. Already in the luxurious hallways, Cleen grumbles internally how dealing with noble warriors is always frustrating. Stopping his own footsteps, he realizes that meddling could become a great tactical advantage for his plan. The boy quickly deduces the conversation will serve for confirmation of facts, murder suspicion, or a simple test. Convinced that his own father wants to assess him, the hare decides he will not back down from this new surprise challenge. With ambition in mind, the former villain swears he will manipulate her connections to rise to the top and quickly opens the side door. The commander enters the small meeting room with firm and quite elegant steps in her high heels. Totally in silence, the woman slowly turns her face to stare at the youth who just entered right behind her. Taking a step toward the youth, she breaks the room's tension by catching his attention in a very playful way. Leaving Cleen completely cornered against the door, the blonde presses him and asks in a seductive tone if she can touch him. Totally red and in a panic at the absurd proximity, the boy wonders if that is really happening there. Besides being beautiful, Leia is the eldest daughter of a grand house and masters the art of the spear like no other in the entire empire. In recent extermination missions, official reports prove all the brutality this warrior hides. During combat, she spins her weapon with extreme ease, releasing massive blasts of purely slashing power. With an intense glow in her focused gaze, the knightess advances through the battlefield at an impressive speed. The gigantic monsters barely have time to roar before being crushed for good by the fast charge. Alone, the Holy Order leader slaughters dozens of high-level beasts without suffering even a single scratch on her armor. After finishing the bloodbath, the girl lands gracefully on the ground, proving her absolute martial supremacy. The commander's overwhelming strength became legend throughout the Empire thanks to her absurd achievements against those creatures. Returning to the present, the protagonist nervously tries to pull away and questions what his cousin thinks she's doing. Not caring about the complaint, she continues advancing and warns him not to fake real family proximity. At that, the boy recalls his own father stating in the past that the commander was indeed a distant relative of the family. However, the former villain's mind quickly puts the pieces together that the woman doesn't have the same blood lineage as his aunt. Turning slightly flushed, the warrior whispers that from that point on, the conversation would be moved only by personal curiosity. In a sudden movement, she throws the platinum-haired youth against the wall, ripping a startled cry from the lord. Staring at the helpless prey, the woman insists on wanting to touch him, leaving the necromancer's head a true mess. Outside the estate, the boy screams at the top of his lungs, demanding to know where that craziness came from all of a sudden. Firmly, Leia grabs the boy's wrist, demanding that he show his hand immediately. Analyzing the youth's palm, she notices the skin is soft and smooth, without any kind of common scar or training callus. The hare panics mentally from the nervousness of the situation as he sees his cousin rubbing his fingers that way. She states that tendons don't lie, about the lack of weapon use, sliding her thumb in an invasive way. Not understanding anything, Klain asks where she's going with this. Being questioned directly if he didn't use a sword in the fight. The warrior is suspicious of how someone with no swordsmanship marks managed to defeat a knight and 20 killers. At that, she throws the bait, wanting to know if the young master turned to some other kind of mysterious power to survive. Taking a gap, Klain pushes the woman away with a quick shove to break all that tension in the environment. Oozing confidence, the youth mocks, asking if she's also going to vomit that same nonsense about him being Archimonde. The former villain quickly deduces this girl is dangerous and is only looking for a thoughtless reaction from him during the talk. Aware that silence would be a confession, the Necromancer decides to be even bolder than the commander and ironizes the suspicion. Instead of being scared, Leia bursts out laughing, repeating the Dark Lord's name as if it were a big joke. Mocking the boy's face, the blonde finds it impossible that a shorty like him is the reincarnation of such a terrifying monster. Standing in the middle of the room, the boy is paralyzed as he processes that gratuitous insult. The shock hits the old lord dead on, leaving him totally indignant at the unexpected offense about his height. Trembling with pure rage, the youth asks if she expressed herself poorly, but the warrior denies it, ironically asking if she needs to repeat the sentence. The knightess destroys the boy's self-esteem, listing that he has no proportion, voice, or presence, being just a little shrimp. Even knowing she's wrong, the Necromancer feels terrible emotional damage from those sharp criticisms. Casting a look over her shoulder, the girl decrees that she'll let him kiss her if he actually manages to defeat an official knight. Faced with that bizarre bet, the hero stays in total silence, not understanding the absurd direction the conversation took. With his mind short-circuiting, Klain wonders why she would offer something so sliss as a reward after having insulted him. He deduces this might be some kind of political bribe, while watching his cousin walk peacefully toward the door. Bathed by the late afternoon light at the window, the commander pauses briefly before finishing her reasoning. The blonde murmurs to herself with great seriousness that the true dark villain would never act in such a restrained way. Then, footsteps echo down the hall, announcing the duo is finally returning to the hall to continue the official judgment. Back in the center of the room, the protagonist mentally admits he was naive to think the nobles would believe him. Count Cornwall maintains a haughty posture, aware that an exiled boy's word is worth absolutely nothing there. Curious about the delay, the long-haired noble politely questions what the two talked so much about in private. Just as the knightess takes the first step to answer the question, a sudden action cuts the atmosphere of the place. In an explosive movement, Klain drives a sword into the hall's marble floor with all his might, startling everyone around. The thunderous sound of the impact scares the nobles present, who stare at the boy completely shocked by the attitude. Without looking away, the hare calls the count by name and decrees that he himself will prove the truth with his own hands. Holding the weapon's hilt firmly, Klain tells the cowardly leader to stop stalling so they can settle things once and for all. Wearing a dark countenance, the protagonist summons the enemy to a formal duel through trial by combat. The insane suggestion makes the whole hall go into a true uproar, with the suits questioning the Lord's sanity. This method is an old northern tradition with no rules for weapons or techniques, where only the winner dictates the final verdict. Caught off guard by the boldness, Delkin stammers, trying to understand the reason for such an extreme measure out of the blue. Klain justifies that the man ignored the ambush evidence and even had the audacity to insult his mother in front of everyone. However, the old villain admits to himself that he feels no emotional attachment to the woman who gave birth to this body. Pressed by the crowd, the count tells the boy to calm down, but is told to make the decision faster. The youth questions if the relative is going to keep the entire nobility waiting for the answer, leaving the branch leader cornered. Stepping forward, Patriarch Heinkel supports his son's idea and guarantees the duel's result will be honored by the lineage. Analyzing the rules, Delkin realizes that accepting the clash means all previous evidence against him would be nullified. Seeing a golden gap, the villain shifts his posture and ironically asks if the magicless boy will be able to handle the strain. The man makes it clear he will use a knight to fight in his place, swearing in his own mind that he will kill the brat. The young lord coldly warns that the adversary will be the only one to die there, proving how Dalton was really eliminated. Without further hesitation, Delkin accepts the formal challenge and decrees that the bloodbath will happen in exactly 4 days. While Leia observes everything in silence, the protagonist mentally guarantees he will use this duel to put the relatives in their place. Night falls over the massive luxury estate, accompanying the dark promise to destroy and rebuild that family. The focus shifts to a luxury chandelier illuminating the mansion's room, when a cry of desperation suddenly cuts through the environment. Completely indignant, Deline yells, questioning if his younger brother has lost his mind to propose a trial by combat like that. Slumped in the armchair without the slightest bit of concern, the boy sighs, mentioning he is already fully aware of the risks. The prodigy swallows hard upon hearing the patriarch himself approve this madness, being left with no arguments to stop the event. Clenching his fists, the elder brother offers to be the younger's representative in the duel, but the offer is immediately rejected. With his arms crossed, Clean tells his brother to focus on reality, reminding him that the family's survival depends on a strong lineage. The platinum-haired one explains that putting the main successor in the arena would be giving victory on a silver platter to the cowardly branch. He understands the prodigy's frustration, but makes it clear he needs to face this ordeal alone to clear his own name. Reaffirming his unshakable decision, the former villain warns he has no reason to yield such a valuable opportunity. The atmosphere gets heavy as Deline pours his heart out, remembering the genuine happiness he felt running to meet the youngest. The affectionate memory of the tiny finger grabbing his hand in childhood reinforces that he saw the new baby as a little angel. That was the first time the prodigy's heart filled with affection for the newborn, creating a strong bond right away. With a sad tone, the blonde laments having waited 7 years to see the boy again, only to see him marching straight to his death now. To cut all that exaggerated drama, Clean hits a rolled-up newspaper right in the middle of the elder's forehead in a swift movement. Rubbing the bump on his head, Deline tries to continue the moral lesson while the protagonist finds it strange that he's crying. Right at the moment the swordsman goes to wipe his face, Dunkel's deep voice calls the young master at the room's door. The commander apologizes for the interruption and mentions that the branch count has already chosen his champion for the decisive duel. Busy with his grumbling brother, Clean turns his face slightly and naturally asks who the guy is that's going to face him. With a tense face, the knight reveals the target's name is Randall, an excommunicated warrior who built a bloody reputation. The double doors of a dark enclosure creak slowly while Dunkel explains the reason the man was banished from the order. The figure of a roaring stuffed lion decorates the bizarre room where the macabre new adversary awaits his next victim. A thick red liquid, identical to fresh blood, is poured from a wooden bucket directly into an iron goblet. Sitting in the middle of a dirty room full of weapons, the giant fighter suffers from a sickly and uncontrolled urge to kill. Without a shred of class, the muscular mercenary raises the entire bucket and downs the drink all at once. Displaying a face full of scars, Randall savors the news of the combat, confessing he misses mutilating children. Far away in the safe mansion, the Hero of Shadows maintains an extremely focused and deadly gaze, awaiting the bloodbath.